Very quickly, I am attaching this video to the front of the official video about libraries and how to start one. And that is to remind you that I am still trying to raise the money to get my real huge, big library from Alaska to Tbilisi, Georgia. 12 time zones and 6,000 kilos, 12,000 pounds away. We are nearing the halfway mark in the entire $12,000 goal. We are almost at the $6,000 mark needed to bring the freighter from Seattle, Washington to the Black Sea. We only need $800 to get to the $6,000 freighter goal, which means people have already given $5,200, which is wonderful. But we got a long ways to go. Not that long, but enough. And only 50 people have given, which is great, but I have videos with thousands of people watching. And even if I just think of the hardcore 300 or so people who really watch most of the videos, there's a few more. In other words, if we get another 50 people, we'll get there. So think about what you can give. The links are down below. Meanwhile, how do you start a library, Bern?
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Bern Power, coming to you on a lovely autumn day here in Tbilisi, Georgia. And today's subject is going to be how to start a library. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, just to remind you, if you like what I'm doing with this channel, do subscribe and give it a like for the algorithms, and do whatever you can to help the channel and spread the word. If you're talking to someone someday and the subject of libraries comes up and, gee, I'd like to collect books in a certain way, pass them this video. It could help. And for more reasons than just simply gee, I want to collect books or something. Okay, so how to start a library? The first big question would be, why start a library? And what's the difference between having a library and just having a collection of something? Well, to go to the why start a library first, there is a need for physical media. There is a need for books, records, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, 8-track cassettes, VHS tapes, 16mm films, comic books, graphic novels, magazines, newspapers, pamphlets, trading cards, handbill, and other ephemera to be saved. Not obsessively. I'm not asking anyone to become a pack rat. But here is the problem. We are living now in times that many people are starting to say, well, this physical stuff is obsolete. I can get everything I want online. And many questions immediately, many assumptions are laden inside of that kind of a thought. And one of them is, well, will you? Will you be able to get everything you want online? And the answer to that is no, you can't. There is no way for you to get everything you want online as far as information or entertainment or anything like that. Because everything isn't available online. Now, there are places you can go, public libraries online, where you can go and read things. Yes, I will admit. And some of these places are good places to search for information. I would say that the standardly available information online, it's okay, but if you ever want to know about anything in particular and really understand it, no, you can't do it online. You have to have serious knowledge, and I'm afraid serious knowledge is just really tough to find online. Now, yeah, you can do a lot of reading, but hey, there is a difference between reading a book and reading a screen. For one thing, the book doesn't shine a light back in your face. Now, I know there are some pads and such where they've tried to minimize this effect, but ultimately that's what's going on here. And secondly, without physical media, I mean, another assumption buried here is that there will be no disruptions. Everything we now have, we will always continue to have, and more. Which I think is tremendously naive, given the political uncertainties that we have entered into, particularly in the 2020s. If you really think there won't be a digital war, there won't be cyber attacks, if there is a war, I would say the chances of that happening grow exponentially as we move through time. I think something's going to happen. People talk about other kinds of things. Sometimes it's just local outages, the kind of things that have happened in Canada and the Atlantic Northeast in America. Other times people are thinking about things like some sort of solar flare outage. And what will that do? Well, you know what? If there's a solar flare outage tomorrow and ruined lots of the internet, I'm not particularly worried. This back here, which isn't my main library. This is just things I have collected in the last 5 years of living here in Tbilisi, Georgia, because I don't stop thinking just because I'm separated from my library. But my library is a way I connect to knowledge and to forming ideas, much more so than, say, watching YouTube videos. And there are people, and occasionally I'll run into them either in life or in the comments section, of people who think like, what's the point of watching a movie? What's the point of reading books? What's the point of all of this stuff? I mean, if you take a real nihilistic look, yeah, I could see you coming up with that. But then again, you would assume that there's no meaning. And it is my dedicated thought that there is. And everything around me screams that there is meaning. And there is meaning to the fragments of humanity that have been left in our physical repositories, whether book or sound or visual recording equipment. So, why start a library? Another reason is if you want to care for the world, you have to realize, people are saying, what about climate change and all of this? As if our computers weren't actively, our smartphones weren't actively contributing to the dilemma. The nice thing about books is you just go back and they're just sitting there. And used books are sitting everywhere, especially since more people are kind of giving up on the notion of physical media. Or, as they say in French, dématérialisation, dematerialization. There's this idea, Gnostic idea, that we will be free of the material world and we will be improved for it. I don't think so. If you don't know how to take care of material world, then how will the ecology ever be solved? Because guess what? That's material. It's the same. What is it? Someone said, if you want to learn to love, start small, buy a plant, take care of the plant, go up from there to maybe a cat or something like that. If you can take care of a cat, maybe you can move on to humanity. And people recommend this because people today are so disconnected from humanity that that's the only way they can kind of start the motors going again. Okay, so what kind of library? I just mentioned many different things. Books, vinyl records, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, cassettes, 8-tracks, VHS tapes, 8 and 16 millimeter films, comic books, graphic novels, magazines, newspapers, pamphlets, trading cards, handbills, and other ephemera. And you could go on and on. I mean, what is the barrier between a collection and a library? Sometimes, what is a collection of trading cards? Is that a library or is that a collection? It could be considered a little bit of each. And I do actually recommend saving digital files. But I don't recommend making computer files your main source, the main source of your library. Not unless you're prepared to make multiple copies. Because it's so easy for some little box, I'll show a photo of them here, I have all sorts of files, especially since I've moved here, I've had to save many files. In Alaska, I used to put them on CDs and DVDs. I'd just burn them. And the truth is, all those files are very, very vulnerable in ways books aren't. Hard drives can be corrupted fairly easily. Drop it a few times, see what happens. CDs and DVDs will lose their sheen at a certain point and will start to corrode. The word isn't clear on exactly how long. I'm hoping that the material I have back in Alaska that's on CD and DVD will, most of it will wait for me to move it to another medium. But while I recommend saving digital files, and I do, particularly, I don't like to watch things and then have them disappear into the ether. I like to be able to refer to them, especially doing what I do with these channels. And that is I need to refer back to it. It's the same with books. I need to refer back to them, which is why I keep them. I keep them not to say I've read them all, but to refer to them. And there's the concept of reference. So some of you may be hearing what I'm saying through ears that are misinterpreting already what I'm saying. And what I mean by that is there are some people out there who are listening to this going like, yeah, I have a lot of books and I want a library. And I'm not talking about simply being a collector. I am talking about, there's a difference to me between being some sort of collector, first editions of books, pristine copies of albums, etc., and being a librarian. For the librarian, it's all about the knowledge. And I'm asking some of you, obviously, this isn't for everybody. This is for people who are seriously interested in knowledge, seriously interested in history, seriously interested in certain kinds of subject matter, whatever that might be. But there are people who are hearing this through collectors' ears. And collecting can be a kind of mania. And there are plenty of people who will talk about this in YouTube videos, how they just couldn't stop. Is that me? There's certainly some aspect there. But for me, I suppose, now I have been in periods of time in my life where I didn't collect much at all. In New York City, as much as I had there, I distinctly went through 2 different periods where I didn't collect much, and 2 periods where I did. Here in Georgia, I started off the first year or 2 hardly collecting any books, and then realizing if I was going to do a YouTube channel that I needed to keep up with the kinds of studies and research that I had been doing in Alaska and started in New York City, actually started in California. So, and I thought my library would get here sooner. So what I've had to do is I use this as an opportunity to plug holes in my knowledge. I'm not buying things I already have. I'm buying things, for instance, I have more books on symbolist art from the late 19th, early 20th century. I had some. I have more now, and I'm keeping my mind sharp on the subject because I want to do something much more in depth with it. But don't use what I am saying about a library as an excuse to simply collect things. I think just collecting mania is wrong. And the reason it's wrong, although it's always a temptation for anyone like myself who is a bit of a librarian, more than a bit of a librarian, to simply get on the collecting train. But you can tell there's a difference. There's two really bad kinds of collectors out there, maybe three. For one thing, there is the person who truly has problems and collects things, and their life gets out of control. These are the kind of people you can't walk through their room because they just keep getting so much stuff. They don't know how to simplify. One of the reasons I have to go back to Alaska is because there's a lot of stuff I'm going to throw out before I bring it here. Not so much the books, but other stuff. I have to weed things out. Weeding is a good thing now and then. Some people do it all the time, and it makes me wonder, why did they buy the books in the first place? It's just like, I don't need this anymore. Why did you need it in the first place? If you're buying books like that, why? Why are you buying books you have a pretty good idea you're going to throw away or get rid of? Why would you do that? Again, it has to do with taking care of things. And if you want to know why the world is having such problems ecologically, it's because we have this record and erase mentality. We have this, I'm done with this now. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Well, so collecting mania, just being a hoarder, no good at all. The next thing is, don't simply make a fetish out of what's popular. Now, I've seen a lot of people, both in reality and online, who have what I would call post-Harry Potter book collections. They were inspired by Harry Potter, and then they just started buying all these YA novels. Now, that's a natural part of any collector, is to start collecting, and you get too far into it. I did that with comic books for a while. I had too many comic books. And then you realize comic books are almost designed to be addictive, much in the same way that streaming is. You never get to the end of these stories. And at a certain point, you've got to put brakes on it and say, okay, that's it. And that's what I did with comic books. I got rid of lots of them in Alaska, and I had a lot that was worth money. So I made some money on that. Because comic book collectors tend to be collectors and not librarians. It's not about what's inside the books. It's not about the stories and the art. It's about the value of the comic. And that kind of collecting, like I said, I'm really out of sympathy with it. So if you have those kind of questions, don't even bother with me, because I'm not there. It's the same with people. I see these people on YouTube who have what I call recent vinyl collections or just Blu-rays. And they're really proud of these. And I'm sitting there saying, really? Aren't there movies that were just on DVD or even, heaven forbid, VHS tapes that you have to keep because there's no other way for you to get that? It's the person who has a recent vinyl LP collection, and they all of their stuff is brand new. To which I'm saying, are you kidding me? Have you not gone out looking through yard sales and such like that for the dollar record that's like a gem? Are you spending $20, $30 a piece for all these records? Is that what you're doing? Because that's just collecting to impress somebody. I mean, I've seen people talking about it, and they'll pull out these, they look like they've never been touched or hardly played records, and they're just sitting on their shelves looking so pristine. I'm saying, you're not a librarian. You are just a collector, and these look like really great objects to collect. I'm reminded of people. I used to work in the music business a couple different times in New York City, which corresponds to the times that I collected more music in particular in New York City, because I was getting so much for almost free. When you're buying record collections, the way I would buy them is I would go and someone would say, hey, can you come look at my records? So maybe they have 100, 200 records. And I look through them, and for one thing I would do is go through them. If they have really popular common records that everybody would have, like, here's the millionth copy of Michael Jackson's Thriller, I'd put it aside. I'm not buying that. I'm just putting it aside. And then I'm going to give them some overall dollar a piece sort of value for the rest. And then I'll look at all this stuff I put aside, usually at least a third or more, sometimes 2/3 of the records I look through, and says, those aren't worth anything to me. If you want to give them to me, fine. Most of the times they would give them to me because everybody had these records. These are the records, here's another Talking Heads record. Here's another Bruce Springsteen record. Here's all this stuff that isn't really worth anything because too many people own it. I am afraid for the Swifties because they're buying all these special things. And I hope they're not thinking these things are going to be valuable because of how many have been sold. So, although one must admit, there are less Taylor Swift records being pressed than ever, for instance, for the Eagles' Greatest Hits, or Michael Jackson's Thriller, or any Michael Jackson record for that matter. So, here's something interesting. When I was buying and selling record collections, here's what you never see. You never see great jazz collections. You never see blues collections for sale. Why? Because the people collecting those are not idiots. They're not following trends. And this is what I was saying about recent collections of stuff that was just popular. Collecting popular stuff is pointless unless you have a really serious reason for doing so. If you are a writer and want to write young adult novels in a fantasy mode, then yes, by all means, Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and Divergent and all these other series. But if you're into literature for something more than that, for ideas, if you're into books for our knowledge, then you're not going to buy things that you're going to simply throw away or simply you're going to age out of. And this is one of the problems with being a young collector, because young collectors, when I was young, I didn't know so well. Although I must admit I had a pretty good idea of what I was collecting at a pretty young age. With my first record collection, notice I said first, there were actually 3. The record collection I have now, the big one, was the third. For instance, here's a collection of stuff I have within my larger collection that you will never see these for sale. And that is, I have over 1,000 just vinyl records, not counting CDs, of just spoken word recordings. I have every Shakespeare play on a spoken word record. I have like 1/3 of the Bible. I tried to get all of it. Reader's Digest had put a complete reading out, and I wanted that. And there's more contemporary ones, but I particularly like those because it was every word of the King James Bible, which is what I want to hear read. I don't want to hear the Living Bible read in its entirety. I want to hear the King James Version. I want the language. I want the good language. But, and I have speeches by Lenin and The Last Hours at Jonestown and T.S. Eliot reading his poetry and Arnold Schwarzenegger doing exercise videos and all of these other things, just crazy stuff and meaningful stuff. And you'll never see a collection like that for sale. And as far as I know, I'm only one of 2 people who has it. I'm sure there are other people. But I had a friend in New York City, and we used to say we were the only people who knew. We knew that we're crazy enough to do that. And then the third kind of collector I would recommend not being, and the third kind of person I would not recommend becoming, is the kind of person who collects merely as an investment. I have very little respect for that person as well. Because the point of getting books, music, whatever, is not as an investment. Yeah, there are things, I have a pretty good idea of what I could collect in any given time. That's how I could buy and sell record collections. I could go through a record collection and tell you that this $1 record is worth $50. But that wasn't why I was buying it, although I must say that's how I made my money. But what I was doing when I was buying those is I would go through those and pull all the ones I wanted out. It didn't matter what the value was. It was about whether it had the information I wanted. So here was a record of recordings of during the Berkeley free speech protests in 1964. I said, I want that because I've never seen another copy. And that's important information. It's okay, here's this weird Chinese surf lounge roller skating rink music that's absolutely amazing, yeah, I'm keeping that because that's worth listening to. Also collecting for investments are subjects to booms and busts. So something that is really valuable during one period is not going to be so valuable in another. And you can see this with any kind of trendy authors and such like this. Trendy authors tend to disappear. So what you want is the solid stuff. But we're not going to go into investment buying, of which there is some point in keeping an eye on what you have that's valuable, just in case it's a rainy day and you need to sell something to get some money, which has happened to me a few times. So let's think about books. And I think that's what most people are doing here. We won't talk too much about a music library, which I obviously can talk quite a bit about since I've got a large one. Over 10,000 vinyls. Whoever came up with this? Vinyl LPs. LPs is the word. But it just shows you how disconnected we are from the past, that people no longer know what records are called. So I have over 10,000 records, 10,000 CDs, all together in a pile. But let's think about books. First of all, it's a massive field. It does no good to simply talk about books, collecting books in the abstract. The best small libraries are specialized. So if you want to start a library of your interests, you're best narrowing your interests to get a good library. Hans Ruckmacher has a great suggestion where he says, for instance, if you were interested in art, when you go to a gallery show or a museum show, there will often be a book connected with that exhibit. And that's a good place to begin, with the book connected to art exhibits, if you're interested in art. If you're interested in other fields, it means you have to follow sources, whether on YouTube or magazines or wherever, of people who are discussing these things, so you know what the books in a certain field are. Having said that, that's easier said than done. We'll talk more about that in a minute, how to actually find the books you're looking for. My inspiration in collecting books and starting libraries comes from the fact that at the age of 15, I became a Christian in the Jesus movement. And one of the things that inevitably I came across was I would talk to pastors of churches. And if you go into their offices or into their houses, one thing you would inevitably notice is their collection of theology books, commentaries. One commentary could be like 25 books. And as someone who never really collected books before, I'd look at those and go like, wow. It's just something, it's like dangling Christmas ornaments in front of a Christmas tree. I'd just be like, wow, those look so cool. And they'd almost always be hardback books, because why would you get paperback commentaries on the Bible? You're going to be using these. I still don't have a big commentary set on the Bible because those are specialized tools for pastors. Just as I don't have a set of law books on my shelves either, because those are specialized tools for lawyers. I do have one really big law book that I found in the garbage outside of in New York City. It was in perfect shape because it was like a year out of date. And that's the whole thing with law books, is they go out of date really easily. But it was so cool, and it had all of these very interesting statistics about America in it. I said, I want to keep this. And it's nice to just have one law book like that in my collection. So I remember also visiting a man in London. I was looking for English Labrie, which had moved from London to another city, and I didn't know this at the time. It was 1978. And so, but this guy graciously met me at his home, and he figured out a nearby bed and breakfast I could stay in, and he ended up taking me there, and that was really kind of him. But one of the things that happened was while I was sitting there, I was noticing his books, and he had all these books on theater, which may have inspired my own collecting on some level much later on in puppetry. Because I asked him about this, and he goes, "Yes, I'm doing research on the theater," and I realized, my goodness, there are all these books on the English theater in particular, and that's all that's in this guy's library. I mean, he probably had other books somewhere, but that's what I was looking at. Later, I met a guy in New York who only collected circus books. I mean, he had a few other books, but circus books was what he had. And I looked at that and I said, like, that is so cool to have books just on one specialization. And again, that certainly inspired my later collecting of puppet books, although not as much as the puppets themselves. These are things based in reality, just as I'm sure this guy who collected theater books and the other guy who collected circus books were based on experience of the theater and the circus. And I would love to talk with the guy who collected circus books now about what he thought about basically Barnum and Bailey shutting down. What a tragedy for the history of the theater. The circus is the theater too. So we make decisions then on what kind of books. Is it books on fashion? I know a lot of women who have those kinds of books. I have a few. The difference between a book on fashion that I would get and the book on fashion that many girls would get is that the book on fashion that I get would be more categorizing and contextualizing the fashions. Whereas the books of fashion that some women might have is all about the how-tos, how to make these things, old techniques, things like that, and obviously the historical and contextualizing books as well. And or World War II. Now, here's the thing. For instance, books on fashion or books on World War II they're massive subjects. So you're not just simply going, if you go out and simply say, I'm going to buy books on World War II, you're already in deep trouble. It's like saying, I'm just going to collect books, because there are so many books on World War II already. Books on music, same problem. You don't collect books on music. I mean, I have some books on classical music to help me contextualize classical music for my rock studies. I have a lot more books on rock music, but even that, I've realized that rock music, you could just have a library full of Elvis Presley books. And even then, you might want to specialize into, his Las Vegas years or his early years or something like that, because there are so many. I mean, there's at least 1,000 books on Elvis Presley. So, before you do anything, you have to ask what interests you. So say you're interested in rock music. Really? How? How are you interested in it? Because other people have written on these things, and right now I'm reading about a very obscure chapter in rock music history that most people have no conception about. The late stage garage revival when it mixed with punk rock. I mean, who's thinking about that as a subject of study? Well, obviously this book exists, and it seems to be one of the very few on the subject. And because it also relates to my own experience studying music and many of the bands I saw in New York while I was there, I said, okay, this is great. I'm glad I have this. I'm glad it further contextualizes the books. Of course, you need, for instance, if you say, I want to study books on fashion, well, then you should get the Racinet book on fashion. You should get some of the books that show you a general approach. You need a large understanding before you can narrow your field of worship. Freudian slip. Before you narrow your field of study. Because you have to have some general knowledge before you can have specific knowledge. You need to really look at the general subject. So you need some books that are good surveys of the field. So books that really talk about World War I or World War II or the Civil War or the Revolutionary War in America or the English Civil War or the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. You need books that will give you an idea. Then you need to narrow it down. In music, Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, the Beatles. These are all still massive subjects. You're probably better off studying Taylor Swift, simply because not that much has been written about her yet. And you could actually learn enough to write something. Not that I would recommend that, really, but do you see what I'm saying? There are people that, if you really want to narrow your field, but first you need to know what are you doing in the context of the whole. So that's when any sort of a subject whatsoever. You need to start with the general and work your way down to the specific. Or let's say you did what I did. You started with Solzhenitsyn. And I started, the first Solzhenitsyn thing I read some essays, speeches, and then I started reading the Gulag Archipelago. And I remember exactly where I was when I started finding these things. And eventually what I did was I was able to take Solzhenitsyn and work my way out. But then I thought, oh boy, I better get a book on the Russian Revolution. I better get some more books on Russia and communism to really be able to understand what Solzhenitsyn's talking about. But fortunately, in the Gulag, Solzhenitsyn is so encyclopedic that I learned tons about the Soviet era in Russia just by reading that, and got far ahead of the curve. So, what is the point of your library? This is the main thing. This is the difference between the collector and the librarian. Although some collectors, the point is the first editions. And I've met people like that, and I've got respect for that, because that's a certain kind of a person. But they're more a preservationist than they are a librarian. They're more about having that first edition as a record of history. Whereas for me, and having the first edition comes way below the knowledge that you'll find inside the book. So why are you collecting books? Is it just to have first editions, just to have, in a sense, wall decorations? Or are they just books for your coffee table? Do you just want big books that you can kind of look through now and then? Yeah, there's a certain value to that. Do you just love stories and fiction, in which case you're going to narrow things down? What kinds of stories? You just can't simply buy all fiction. Now, someone like myself says, I really should read, since I not only read fiction but write it, I say I really should be familiar with many of the classics. Not all of them, because there's too many. And I haven't got the time, and I have other subjects I'm interested in, but enough. So I have a lot of fiction that I've read over the years. And sometimes people want to know, what are you reading now? What's the new fiction? To which my response is, I don't know what the new fiction is, because it takes so long to read. And there are people who read only new stuff, and I feel kind of sad for them. Because, hey, did you finish all the older stuff? How do you know this new stuff is any good? I'd say it takes a while to figure out if the new stuff is any good. Are you after information, or are you after a mood? If so, you still need to narrow your interests. There is no good reason to simply collect to collect. And I think that the people who say, yeah, I just get whatever offline or whatever, fine. I would say it's probably better to simply, for instance, let's say you're interested in this kind of knowledge, so you watch people discussing things. Probably better to do that than simply to collect for no reason. Although, then there is the problem of, you have so much, the difference between listening and reading is quite stark. Reading is something more, when it's affixed to the page, it is something more, it's been strained, it's been perfected. The ideas are better, are more eloquent, are said better, at least we hope. Whereas a lot of what's said here is what I'm saying here as good as what I would say if I wrote this out as an essay? Probably not. Because a lot of times, I have some notes, but a lot of times I'm just kind of, just talking based on what comes to my mind. Also, when I say you need to specialize, I don't mean not to buy books on other subjects. As I've been saying, you need general knowledge. And you will have major and minor interests. I have plenty of major interests. Music is a major interest. Puppets later became a major interest. Georgian culture and then Georgian art in particular became a major interest, as well as Georgian music. But I can tell you there are very few books on Georgian music. And I've found many more books on Georgian art here, none of which seem to be available in the West. I mean, if there's 400 or 500 books on Georgian art, which there are at least, there may be, maybe 10 of them, 15 that are available in the West in any form, print or out of print. So, but yeah, what if you collect books on baseball or ballet or dance? That doesn't mean you don't read novels, you see. So I'm not simply saying the only way to have a good library is simply to have a narrow field. But what I'm saying is to be worthy of being called a library, not simply a collection of books. There's one person who says, oh, check out my book collection. Great. But you need a library. And a library is focused and has a topic. But generally, it allows you to research your topic well, your main interest. You can dive into it and actually learn something about something specific. And as Owen Barfield once said, if you learn a lot about just one thing, eventually you come to all of the issues within that one thing. And Rookmacher said basically the same thing when he was talking about art with a scientist. And then they basically said, once they boiled down the issues inside of it, they go, oh, I recognize this. This is the same issues we're dealing with, just in a different field. All right, before we talk about how to find books, let's talk about the quality of books that you should buy. Quality is very important because it's too easy to buy cheap books and then have to upgrade later, which is, to me, a waste of both time and resources. First of all, do not ever buy mass market paperbacks unless that is the only way the book exists, or the book exists at this moment. What do I mean? For instance, let's say you want to read Stephen King books, and there are good reasons to read Stephen King books. Well, in America, you can find his books cheaply, in a small size on all these different stands, and you'll be tempted to buy one. Don't. Because if you like Stephen King, you will ruin that book after reading it once and a half. Many people reread Stephen King. It would be much better to simply, let's say you don't want to, buy every new Stephen King book, or you don't want to make the investment of, prevent me, God forbid, of buying old. You don't want to try to get first editions of Stephen King books anymore because they're way out of your price. But that doesn't mean you can't find hardcovers of Stephen King books pretty cheaply. You can. You go to a place like Amazon or Abe Books, or you go to a bookstore and you just simply you'll see, 12th printing of a book. Get that. It's hardcover. Get an unmarked hardcover. You can decide whether you want to keep dust jackets or not, and buy that, and it'll last on your shelf. Don't buy these cheap trade paperbacks, because as I have a few old ones, and you have to keep them in plastic to prevent them from aging. It's just ridiculous. So buy the best possible edition that you can afford. And you can decide how much money you want to spend, but it's up to you to not waste money. And simply buying something to read it and then have it disintegrate is a waste of resources, and we shouldn't support that kind of industry. We shouldn't support that kind of marketing tactic. Even if you don't have much money, look for books as used hardcovers. Many times you can find them, especially if it's a classic novel. Simply don't buy the cheap books. And also watch the editions. On some books, particularly translations, it does good to do a little bit of research first so that you don't buy, for instance, there are bad translations of Solzhenitsyn's early works, and you can find them much cheaper because no one's reading them. Well, do a little bit of homework to see what are, it doesn't take much, a little trip to Wikipedia, and you can find out probably pretty quick. I have never looked up, for instance, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich on Wikipedia, but I'm pretty sure it's going to give you a little bit of a publication history. So buy the best edition for what you can afford. Also going along with that, there are many editions of books that are reprinted. So, for instance, I have some leather-bound copies of books, I don't know, the Arabian Nights or fairy tales or The Wizard of Oz, a collection of the first 5 novels. These kind of nice new leather-bound novels, leather-bound editions, they're not that expensive. $25 for a new leather-bound version of, I don't know, the first 5 copies of The Wizard of Oz, complete with the art. That's a good deal, $25 or less. You can find it for $20 if you really search, and that's a very good edition. Now, there's a whole thing about the quality of the paper and all of these things. I'm assuming the people watching this are not going to be archivists, and that the main reason for starting a library isn't to simply start looking for the books that will last through a millennium or something like that. So just, look for editions that are interesting. This is especially true for anything that would be considered a classic work. There are many, many different editions, and you should look for those. Look for the edition that seems to have art that you appreciate. I mean, for instance, let's say you want to read the works of Edgar Allan Poe. Well, there's all sorts of people who have illustrated it. So what are you going to do? Are you going to buy just some cheap edition? Even in hardbacks, you can find one that has no illustrations at all, if you want. Or you can find some that have the best. I think Virgil Finlay is probably the best Edgar Allan Poe illustrator from over 100 years ago. I have an edition with his illustrations because I find they work with the text quite well. And plus I like certain kinds of illustrated books. Finding books. How do you find books? First, you have to know what to buy. So before you can find the book, you have to know how to search for a book. And what can I say? Let me give you puppetry as an illustration, and I will show you a few of the puppetry books I have here while I'm discussing this. Now, if you were to ask me in 1995, when I still lived in New York, how many books on puppetry do you have? And what do you know about it? I had one book that I had found at that time. I still remember I like to discard the dust jacket and take it off. And I don't throw it away. I just put it off to the side. Then I have a ritual. When I move, I put the cover back on. And so I'm expecting when I get my books here, which you're going to help me with, right? That I will go through the ritual of taking all the covers off. And I've decided what I'll probably do is put them inside, all of these covers inside like an artist portfolio, wrap it up and put it under my bed, and then occasionally add new covers when I need to. But, so basically I think that was the year I bought my first book on puppetry. And that's where I had gotten interested in, through the films of Jan Schwankmeyer in the Czech Republic and the Quay brothers who live in London, but were inspired by Polish animation. So I started essentially at zero, knowing just a little bit. I'd seen these. I knew nothing about it in the past. I couldn't tell you even that much about the Commedia dell'arte. I couldn't tell you about anything to do with the history of puppetry. I knew there were marionettes and that they were different than, what are these called? Hand puppets. There are shadow puppets too. In 1995, we'll just say I picked up a book for the first time and I started at zero. Turns out that book had some interesting ideas. It wasn't the best book to start with, but it wasn't the worst either. It wasn't a survey as much as it was a theoretical book, but fortunately it wasn't a book written under critical theory. It was close, but not exactly. So that meant it had some value. There are some puppet books that are written under critical theory that it just makes me, gives me pain. Now, for us today, a look at Wikipedia might be okay as a place to start, although I went to the reference and book recommendations at the bottom of the puppetry page, and they were kind of confusing and difficult to sort out. Likewise, I asked for 10 serious books on ChatGPT, and only half of the recommendations were useful. Why? Because ChatGPT and Wikipedia are not written by puppeteers. They're not written by theater archivists and librarians. They're not written by people who know their history or know the field. Wikipedia is a collection of people putting things, and it's very thin information. And ChatGPT has access to all this stuff, but it doesn't know the difference between a good thing and a bad thing. So I specifically asked ChatGPT, give me 10 serious books on puppetry, and some of them were way too specific for a person who wanted to get involved. Some were too simplistic, how-to books for young people. And it was the same with a search on Amazon or Abe Books. If you type in the word puppetry in the book section of Amazon, well, for one thing, you got to watch out for all of the stuff that shows up under the title. For some reason, there's some kind of comedy troupe in Australia who uses the phrase puppetry of the penis, and that will show up almost instantly. So you have to get search terms, and some of the search terms I would recommend are puppetry, puppets, marionettes, puppet theater, shadow puppets. Watch out, there will be a band that has that name. Hand puppets, books on the theater and such like this. This is where you're going to start. Or puppet history is a good thing as well. Another possibility is that as I recognized, as I was first starting to get interested in puppetry, I recognized Jan Schwankmeyer was Czech. And I didn't yet know the depth of the connection between Czech puppeteers and the history of puppetry yet. But if I put the words Czech puppet, Czech puppetry, Czech theater into my searches, whether through Amazon, Abe Books, the internet itself, I would get closer. So, or Czech animation would be another one. So knowing something that's more specific, the more specific you can say, this is what I'm interested in. So I figured out right away I wasn't interested in Muppets at all. I thought I would show you a bit more of the Česká Loutka book. And I've taken the cover off, because I always take the covers off, because I like seeing the cloth on the walls, and I have a separate place where I keep the covers. And I have a ritual where when I move, I put the covers all back on, which means all my books back in Alaska have the covers on them. So as you can see, it's a fairly big book. I have big hands. And you can see there's a quite nice photographs here. That's a particularly nice one. A lot of character, I think much more color than the other book, which was largely black and white photography. But yeah, excellent characters, both from the past and also up to the present. So it covers, I think, some of the same puppets, but much different photographs, obviously. I like that woman character on the side there. And, of course, all the Czech demons and knights and dragons. Looks a bit like Laurel and Hardy. That's a cool one. Spabel and Hervinek. This is kind of abstract, isn't it? And near the back of the book, there are some more modern ones. A nice Pinocchio. So I just thought I'd show you a little bit of the book. Now, it is all written in Czech. However, if you ever do want to get one of these, get one that is sent from the Czech Republic, or it might say Germany. And the nice thing is, while it's all written in Czech, there is a complete book of everything written that comes along with it. And you want to make sure you get a new copy, and that will be with it. So just a recommendation. So there you are. Česká loutka for your delectation. And anytime I would see something with a Muppet on it, I would go like, okay, this is most of the time not going to work for me. And that is also what pushed me towards European puppetry rather than American puppetry, because in American puppetry, the Muppets are squatting directly in the middle of the field. And they're so hard to get around, and they don't move. They're just sitting there like a lump. Whereas in European puppetry, there are many different things. And I could go in European puppetry from the primitive, the origins, to the avant-garde in a very succinct manner. And that's one reason why I narrowed my field to European puppetry. Another thing you can do is look for somebody who knows something serious about your subject, and then listen to their recommendations. So, for instance, let's say you're interested in music or film or puppets or certain subjects in art and such like that. Well, you can write me a letter at my email address, which is in the About section, and I will respond to you. If you say, Bern, I'm interested in starting to understand, I mean, it could be a subject like comedy, which I know a lot about. Comedy, where should I begin? And I do get these questions, and I enjoy answering them, because I'm saying I'm helping someone to get interested in something outside of themselves or connected with themselves, but I'm not interested in people who just, it's just like, Bern, where can I go for psychological knowledge? I can't help you there. Because to me, you don't get the psychological knowledge until you interact with the stuff around you. The stuff being the people, the world, the animals, the arts, the architecture, and such like that. You need some general knowledge, as I've said. So survey books are a good place to begin. And what survey books do have that's very good, besides the survey, for instance, a well-done survey on puppetry, like Bill Baird's book, The Art of the Puppet from about 1965, or Eileen Blumenthal's book on puppetry, although I think that's inferior to Bill Baird's book. Bill Baird's book. But nevertheless, they have a lot of references, whether it's in the text, if they mention such and such a thing. So, for instance, Tony Sarg. I had no idea who Tony Sarg was until I started with some of these books. Eileen Blumenthal's book, Puppetry, A World History, which kind of gives the game away that it's going to be a bit more politically correct because, we've gotten to the point now where you can't say anything without saying everything because someone will say, but you forgot about, and to which my response is, I don't really care. I'm interested in European puppetry. I'm not going to talk about African puppetry and Indonesian puppetry and South American puppetry and American puppetry in the same breath, except as it relates. So I'll talk about Javanese puppetry as it relates to Richard Teschner, the Austrian puppeteer, because he brought the technique of Wayang Golek to the West, but then modified it. Then it really genuinely interests me. And so obviously I know my stuff a bit, and I can have conversations about those things. But I don't feel like discussing it all the time. But the point is, if you look if you go through, say, Abe Books, a good source for connecting with used booksellers, but then again, so is Amazon, and you look for something very specific, like Bill Baird, The Art of the Puppet, or Margarita Nicolescu, The Puppet Theater of the Modern World, an international presentation in word and picture, you can find cheaper editions that are used. If you find, for instance, if you want to find it like new, it's going to cost you more money. But if you're looking for something that's good, that's, been read and looks like it's been read, then you can save some money and get a book like that. For instance, I picked up in the last few years the Margarita Nicolescu book, and she was one of the people behind Unima and also behind Charlesville Messier's Puppetry Institute. And her book is quite good. And it's interesting, the difference in the way it's phrased from Eileen Blumenthal's book is she says the word international as opposed to world. And I find that's a very interesting take right there. I really like international music. I really have a problem with world music. Why? Well, someday I'll explain that. We'll keep that out there. But then I went and bought the Routledge, or is it Routledge, Companion to Puppetry and Material Performance, the Routledge Companions Edition. And I was very disappointed because it was a collection of essays, most of them from critical theory. And not only that, the book itself, and this is very important, the book itself cost me about $100. It's a university press, so I understand that, university presses. And I thought, I'm going to be getting this great book. Cost me about $100 for a hardback. I want the hardback. And then it comes, and it's like someone just put a paperback inside of case laminate hardcovers, just these kind of plastic kind of hardcovers. And I'm going, why? I could have just bought the paperback and got the same thing in this case. And so places like Oxford and Routledge, these university presses, are now starting to press really bad quality books. But that kind of wraps up what I'm trying to say, is you want to find books, you need to get knowledge about what you're reading. So you're going to need to buy some sort of survey book on the subject you're interested in. And you start with that, and then you start getting the names out of that. The same thing can happen if you find, for instance, on YouTube, someone who is seriously talking about a subject. And that if you find someone who actually knows about their subject, they'll mention the names that you should be looking for. And this is how you get your knowledge. You can get it through lectures, you can get it through discussions, you can get it through magazine essays, you can get it through books, and there are other ways as well. And I've always got my ears open. For instance, I've been working on this thing with Taylor Swift lately that I'm going to turn into a video. And I suddenly said, okay, what I really need here is something. Obviously, no one has studied Swifties yet. It's too new a phenomena, even though they've been around for over 10 years. This mass level of Taylor Swift mania, which is very similar in many ways to Beatlemania, has not been studied yet. But it is similar to Beatlemania. So I thought to myself, is there a study on the psychological effects of Beatlemania? Now, I have other books on the Beatles, but it's interesting. So far, all of the YouTube videos I've found, and I haven't looked through all of them, I just got this idea this afternoon, are all people reminiscing, yeah, Beatlemania when I was young, yeah, we went crazy for it. And I'm going no, that's not what I want. I want to know why teenage girls in particular, although there were always guys who would go to these as well, but you never see them doing the same behavior, were screaming so loud during some of the last concerts the Beatles did in Shea Stadium, which was right next to LaGuardia Airport, that a Boeing 707 could fly directly off of the airport next door and you couldn't hear it. I want to know what do psychologists, does Jordan Peterson ever deal with this? I don't think so. If you know of one place where he does, let me know. But why this? Now, it's easy to say, estrogen, teenage girls, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to say that stuff, but I think there's something else going on. Because when I look at certain photos from the 1930s in Germany, I see the same psychological mechanism going on. And I am very interested in what it means. The psychological, and there are people who said they were at one of these huge rallies in the 30s in Germany, in Nuremberg. And you see some of these photos of just so many people. And there was a woman who said, I'm not going to scream when he comes by. I'm not going to do it. And slowly he's coming up. He's like in a vehicle, outside the vehicle, standing and waving at everyone. And you can hear the wave of screams. So for one thing, the wave of screams is everywhere. But the closer it gets, suddenly she just finds herself doing it. Do you see? So, without going into that, I want the book that discusses the subject. And how do I look for it? Well, first of all, I'm going to have to find a book which, I know the literature on the Beatles and Beatlemania, but what we really need here is a psychological approach. What is going on? And this is one of the things I find most lacking in psychological studies. Everyone talks about your own personal psychology. I'm interested in mass psychology. And I know I'm not the only one. People who work in advertising are interested in mass psychology. People who work in politics are interested in mass psychology. There are people who know about it. I am sure that there are people who work promoting. Bill Graham, who was the great rock promoter, there's a famous scene where he was at Woodstock saying, this is absolutely out of control. You've got to put blocking points here and here and here. And he understood, in terms of crowd behavior, what you needed to do. I understand a bit of that myself. But I am suddenly saying, if I really want to understand the Swifties, I really need to understand this aspect of crowd psychology. And it's a dark one when you think about it, that all these people will just start doing this. And why are young girls more susceptible to this? Well, this also gets to the question of why young girls are more susceptible to social contagion. These are subjects. So this is how I find subjects. So obviously this subject would go on my music shelves because that's what I'm ultimately interested in. But I might find the psychological book on the subject. And then that would go in a psychological section. But if I find the book that deals specifically with the psychological effects or predominantly on the psychological effects of Beatlemania and what caused it, then that would be a lot. So that's how I look for books. I narrow down. See, that's a really super laser focus on a subject. So it's not simply Beatlemania. You're going to find plenty of books like that. But you're looking for why. That's narrow. Now, I can do that because I've been doing that for so long. And I know my subjects. So I can say, oh, this is a part of this subject I need to know better, that we all need to know better. And I need to research it to bring it here. So that's how I find books. And this is just literally out of something that happened this afternoon. Okay. Along with my showing you all sorts of other things with books during the course of this, I think I've been talking long enough, don't you think? But I really encourage you to think about something, a subject you're interested in, and starting to work on knowing it. And by doing so, becoming a bit of a librarian on the subject. So I am not encouraging you to be collectors. Don't have a lot of interest in that. I am encouraging you to be librarians, stewards of art, stewards of knowledge, stewards of music, stewards of history, stewards of the sciences. I'm encouraging you to focus, to understand, but while keeping the larger picture of what's going on open. So you will have books that will give you maybe the history of the world, or the history of America, or the history of your country. But then you will need to focus in on what you're interested in. Maybe you don't fully know that yet. That's fine. I bet you have some ideas, though. So if you're watching this, you probably have some ideas. So pursue those. And my email door is open. Feel free to contact me if you want some more specific information, provided that I can give it. If I can't, I'll just simply say, I don't know that much about that. But here's how I would go about starting to learn. And like I said, I went from 0 on puppetry to now, 25 years later, or more than 25 years. People consider me some kind of expert. That's really weird. You never know. But then again, there's a lot of things I know about because I've taken the time to learn and to understand. And the fact is that I keep books on my shelves because I know I will refer back to them. Once I know this book has this kind of thing, keep it there. I might need it. Who knows? There might be a YouTube video I make someday on mass hysteria. I don't know. I never thought about it before. So, from Tbilisi, Georgia, I just want to thank you all for spending this time with me, and especially all of those. At this moment, it's only been 50 people who've contributed, and all from the channel, and I'm up to almost over $5,000, almost halfway to my $12,000 goal. So, there are more than 50 people watching this, and if you're one of those more than 50 people, like the other couple of hundred, you need to start thinking about helping me. Someone just sent in $10 from Bulgaria. Great. Someone else gave me $300. Great. Someone, CW came up with this scheme to get, and $500. Great. So, whatever you can give, do it. Links below. And we will talk soon. Drobit from Georgia. Temporarily. We will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.